So we have been looking at this text called Illumination of the Thought, which is written by Lama Tsongkhapa. Is it the sound okay? Yeah, it's quite far. So this text, Illumination of the Thought, is written by Lama Tsongkhapa and is a commentary to another text, the supplement to the Middle Way by Chandrakirti, and that in turn is a commentary to the text by Nagarjuna, Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way, which in turn is a commentary to the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras of the Buddha. And so far we've been looking at the first verse of Supplement to the Middle Way, which says, "Hearers and medium Buddhas are born from the monarchs of subduers. Buddhas are born from Bodhisattvas. The mind of compassion, non-dual awareness, and the mind of enlightenment are the causes of children of conquerors." Okay, so Lama Tsongkhapa is really unpacking this verse, going into great detail about the meaning of every word, almost. So far we covered the first line, which says, hearers and medium Buddhas. So what are medium Buddhas? Yeah, another term is solitary realizers, prateka Buddhas in Sanskrit. And they are born from the monarchs of subduers, who, that refers to who? The Buddhas. Okay. So how does Chandrakirti explain that hearers and medium Buddhas are born from Buddhas? How are they born from Buddhas?
They follow the Buddha's teachings.
Yes. Huh? I'll repeat it. Yeah, so they hear teachings from the Buddha, and he mentioned specifically teachings on dependent arising. And they meditate on these teachings, and then they reach their goal, which is nirvana. And so that's not too difficult. Right? Then the second line, we just started looking at that last time. He says, Buddhas are born from bodhisattvas. So how does that work? How can we say that Buddhas are born from bodhisattvas? What does Chandrakirti explain?
So one of the reasonings is that the continuity of mind of a bodhisattva, its final result will be Buddhahood. So that's one of the ways to explain how Buddhas are born from bodhisattvas.
Yeah. That's okay, yeah. So there's a second way. Cooperative condition. How does that work? How are bodhisattvas a cooperative condition for Buddhas?
They encourage.
Right. They encourage each other. So bodhisattvas encourage each other to work for enlightenment. So they provide encouragement, help for other bodhisattvas to reach enlightenment. Okay, so right. So there's two ways then that we can say Buddhas are born from bodhisattvas. The first way is that bodhisattvas are the substantial cause. The substantial cause refers to the cause that transforms into the result, like a seed transforming into the plant. Yeah? Or clay transforming into a clay pot. Okay, so Buddhas don't just appear out of nowhere, but they were previously bodhisattvas who followed the path and then transformed into Buddhas. So they are the substantial cause of Buddhas. And then the second way is the cooperative condition. So just as a seed can't transform into a plant all by itself. It needs other conditions like the water and the soil and the sunshine and the heat to be able to transform into the plant. So in a similar way for a bodhisattva, to transform into a Buddha, they need other cooperative conditions, one of which is other bodhisattvas encouraging them. Don't give up, keep going, Don't get discouraged, even if it's hard and takes a long time. So they encourage each other. And in that way, bodhisattvas are able to continue going on the path and eventually become Buddhas. Mm-hmm.
Wasn't so much confusion, but also thinking, at least in a really mundane way, who are we going to get direct teachings from? Probably not the Buddha as much as we were from people who have at least, bodhisattvas at some level or another. Mm. So not only that encouraging each other didn't register with me as much as also planting the seeds for other people to get on the path and follow them. That's not what he says, I know.
Well, it's true. Just because he didn't say it, it's definitely true. Yeah, I mean, to become a bodhisattva in the first place, to go from an ordinary being to a bodhisattva, if you didn't have a chance to meet a Buddha, then you may have had a chance, there's probably a greater chance of meeting a bodhisattva and hearing teachings from that bodhisattva, and also just observing that way of being. Like we had the chance to meet His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who I'm sure is at least a bodhisattva. So just to see how a bodhisattva is, about what they do with their life, how they behave and so on. So then, that can help us generate the bodhicitta and start on the path. Right below song. Where's the...
With the wording in here, I would think that is what he's saying, because he says, the foremost holy Manjushri, as a bodhisattva caused our teacher and Buddhas other than him to take hold of the altruistic mind of enlightenment at the very beginning. That would mean that he taught him as a non-bodhisattva and he became a bodhisattva.
Yeah, good point. So that means Manjushri was already a bodhisattva even before Shakyamuni Buddha became a bodhisattva. Timeline. But then I think it's also true that they keep encouraging each other as they go along the path. Okay, so I have to find the place here. I lost it. Okay, so we'll continue now where we left off. So we're now on page 15. And there's, right down at the bottom, an objection. Here, Chandrakirti states the position of an objector who says that since bodhisattvas are conqueror children, it is reasonable for bodhisattvas to be born from conquerors, but to propound the opposite is not reasonable. In response, he says that it is true that bodhisattvas are children of conquerors, thereby indicating that he also asserts such, though it is necessary to indicate the reason why, despite asserting this, there's no contradiction in saying that the Buddhas are born from bodhisattvas. It is unreasonable that Chandrakirti, without indicating such, proves that Buddhas are born from bodhisattvas, for a qualm about proving such has already arisen, and that qualm has not been eliminated. So, I think what he's saying here, in simple language, it's referring to the objection that was given above, back on page 15, towards the top. Somebody raised this objection to Chandrakirti saying that Buddhas are born from bodhisattvas. And he said, hey, wait a minute, bodhisattvas are called children of conquerors. They are born from Buddhas. How can you say that Buddhas are born from bodhisattvas? That would be like saying a child is born from his father, right? That makes sense? That's what that objection was saying. And then in the response to that, Chandrakirti says, yes, it's true that bodhisattvas are children of certain conquerors, but it's also true that bodhisattvas are causes of Buddhas. And then he went on to explain that. So now this objector seems to be saying, you didn't really answer my question. You agreed that, bodhisattvas are children of conquerors, but then he didn't explain why or how. He just went on to explain how the other way around, how Buddhas are born from bodhisattvas. You didn't really answer my doubt. So it seems that this person is thinking, you can't have it both ways. You can't say that, bodhisattvas are children of conquerors, and also that Buddhas are born from bodhisattvas. He seems to think, it's one or the other, but not both. That's, I think, simply what he's saying here. That makes sense? So you haven't really eliminated my doubt as to how it can be both ways. So then, next is the response. And there is no such fault. With respect to the first reason why it is indicated in the root text that Buddhas are born from bodhisattvas, when Chandrakirti speaks of the attainment of the fruit of Buddhahood through a bodhisattva's practice on the path of learning, it is known that bodhisattvas are not the child of the Buddha that they themselves attain to. Okay? So Chandrakirti said, Buddhas are born from bodhisattvas, but you can't say that the bodhisattva is the child of the Buddha that they themselves become. He's not saying that. He's not saying just any old Buddha is born from any old bodhisattva, but more that the bodhisattva who's following the path and transforms into a Buddha, that Buddha is born from that bodhisattva. It's a little complicated. Does that make sense? Hence, how could Chandrakirti be saying it is true about that? So Chandrakirti is not saying, that, for example, let's say Shakyamuni Buddha. So Shakyamuni Buddha is born from the bodhisattva that he used to be previously. So he's not saying that that bodhisattva is born from Shakyamuni Buddha. Right? That would be nonsense, I think. And furthermore, one newly born as a bodhisattva from the speech of our teacher is a child of this Buddha, but this Buddha is not born from that bodhisattva. Okay, so Shakyamuni Buddha teaching, and then somebody listening to the teaching and generating bodhicitta and becoming a bodhisattva. Okay, so we can say that bodhisattva is a child of that Buddha, but not the other way around. We can't say that that Buddha is a child of that bodhisattva. Yeah. So this is how he's dispelling this doubt. So it's true both ways. Some bodhisattvas are born from Buddhas, some Buddhas are born from bodhisattvas, but you can't say that just any Buddha and any bodhisattva are parent and child to each other. So he says, hence, if one has smarts, I was surprised by that word. I didn't realize that was actually a valid word. Smarts? Because in the old version it said intelligence. So this is a more modern term. Hence, if one has smarts, why would one not realize, in dependence upon the answer given in the commentary, that the objection is from one who has not distinguished these two facts? So come on, get yourself together. Nevertheless, it appears that many senseless explanations have emerged about this. So maybe a lot of people have been arguing about this, but, it's not really that complicated. Is that clear? Okay, so anyway, it is possible for Buddhas to be born from bodhisattvas. It's also possible for bodhisattvas to be born from Buddhas. It's not contradicting. And also using that example of father and children. Yes, okay, if you have a father and a child, then obviously that child is a child of that father, and you couldn't say that that father is the father of that child. But on the other hand, the father is a child of his own father. Okay? So, we are all both, well, not those of us who don't have kids, but those who do have kids, we can say they are both a parent and a child. It's not contradictory. It just depends in relation to whom are you saying that. Okay, next point. Okay, Chandrakirti's next point is to be put together as indicating that since bodhisattvas are the principal causes of Buddhas, Buddhas praise bodhisattvas. There are 4 reasons for the praise. So this is in the auto commentary, Chandrakirti's auto commentary. He mentions these 4 reasons why Buddhas praise bodhisattvas. The first is because this excellent cause of a Buddha is very concrete, that is to say, very precious. Okay, so the substantial cause of a Buddha is a bodhisattva, just as the substantial cause of a seed is the substantial cause of a plant is a seed. So without a seed, you can wish for tomato plants. You can wish and pray and recite mantras and do all kinds of things to get tomato plants. But if you don't plant seeds, if you don't have seeds and plant them and take care of them, you're not going to get tomato plants. So in a similar way, we can wish for Buddhas to appear in the world, but there's no way that's going to happen unless there are those who generate bodhicitta and become bodhisattvas and follow the path. So bodhisattvas are very precious from that point of view. They are the essential cause, the substantial cause of Buddhas. So they're very precious. And the second reason is because it is in consideration that even through expressing worship to the cause, bodhisattvas, worship of the fruit, Buddhas, is implicitly projected. Okay, so because bodhisattvas are the cause of Buddhas, when we express praise to them directly, we say how wonderful bodhisattvas are. Indirectly, we are praising Buddhas. Because why are bodhisattvas so precious and worthy of praise? It's because they're going to become Buddhas eventually. They will become Buddhas and they will become this amazing being who's helping everyone throughout the universe. And when I was reading this, I thought about the Sutra of Golden Light. Are all of you familiar with the Sutra of Golden Light? No? So it's beautiful. Yeah. So there's lots of different chapters and different stories in here. But towards the end, chapter 18, the chapter on the tigress. So this tells the story of the previous life of the Buddha when he was the prince Mahasattva, and he gave his body to the tigress, mother tiger, and her babies. Everyone's heard that story, right? But the lead up to this is quite lovely. I won't read it all, but just tell the gist of it. So there was a time when the Buddha, accompanied by 1,000 bhikshus, was passing through a certain area. And they came to a certain forest. There they saw a very beautiful area with dark green, soft grass and lots of beautiful flowers. So they thought, this is a really nice place to have a teaching. So let's sit down. So everybody sat down. And then, then the Buddha said to the followers, would you like to see the remains of a bodhisattva who performed tasks that are difficult to perform? And the bhikshu said, yes. And then the Buddha struck the surface of the earth with his hand, and the earth shook, and then there arose a stupa made of silver, gold, and jewels. So a stupa just arose out of the earth. And the Tathagata asked Ananda to open the stupa, and Ananda did so. And then inside he saw an urn covered with gold and inlaid with jewels and pearls. And anyway, so they took out this urn, and it was and there were relics inside of this urn. And so the Buddha said, bring these relics here. And the Buddha took the relics in his hand, and he said, here are the bones of one endowed with excellent virtue and supreme intellect, humility, meditation, delight through patience, and sublime fame, one who continually strove for the wisdom of his enlightenment, intelligent and possessing steadfast, joyous perseverance. He always delighted in giving. And then the Buddha said to his followers, he said, O bhikshus, offer homage to the Bodhisattva's relics, fully charged with ethics and virtue, which are a field of merit and extremely rare to see. And then all the bhikshus paid homage to these relics of the Bodhisattva. And then Ananda said something like, but wait a minute, you have risen way above the world and you're venerated by all beings. Why are you venerating these relics? Yeah. So why are you praising this Bodhisattva? And then the Buddha said, Ananda, it is because of these relics that I quickly awoke to peerless and supreme enlightenment. Yeah. And then he proceeded to tell the story. So this is like an example, an illustration of Buddha praising this Bodhisattva who was himself in a previous life and did this amazing deed of offering his body to the mother tigress and her cubs to save them from starvation. So anyway, it's just like an illustration of Buddha praising a bodhisattva. And why? Because without that bodhisattva doing that deed, I wouldn't be here. I think that's what he's saying. You know, it's because of this wonderful deed that was done by that bodhisattva that I was able to reach the state of enlightenment and be the Buddha that you see in front of you. So it shows that praising the bodhisattva is a way of praising the Buddha. Praising the bodhisattva directly is indirectly praising the Buddha.
Yeah, sometimes a real prayer is like to the 8 bodhisattvas. And is that meant like that? I was wondering about that when we praise Manjushri and Maitreya and Avalokiteshvara and such. Is that in that to be seen in that context too?
Yeah. I guess it depends on your mind. I mean, of course, they're worthy of praise because of their bodhicitta and all the things that they do and so on and so forth right now. But yeah, if you also think they have made this vow, this promise, this commitment to become a Buddha, they're not going to always remain as bodhisattvas, but eventually they will transform into Buddhas and then be able to do even more wonderful deeds for more beings and so on and so forth. Yeah, but I guess, I don't know, it seems like he's saying even if, just praising them themselves, we are praising the Buddhas. Yeah. Okay, then the third reason, the third is because it is taught that just as one who has seen the shoot, trunk, and so forth of a medicinal tree bearing countless wished-for fruits would especially cherishingly sustain the leaves of a tree when they are young and soft, so one should also cherish and sustain with great striving the state of a novice bodhisattva, the shoot of the tree of Buddhahood that nourishes all beings. So he's comparing bodhisattvas to the shoot of a medicinal tree. So even when, like if there is such a tree, that has all these medicinal properties, the leaves, the flowers, the fruits, even the bark, is very, very beneficial and relieves sickness and so forth. So even when that tree is very young and small, maybe it's just a shoot, we take care of it, we cherish it, and we take care of it, knowing that, if we take care of it, it will grow into this much bigger tree and be of greater benefit to beings. And then the fourth reason is because there are those who are in attendance in the presence when bodhisattvas are praised and who are set in the three vehicles will definitely get connected just to the great vehicle. So, like for example in this sutra, when the Buddha is praising a bodhisattva, expressing their qualities, telling stories about what they've done and so on and so forth, then listeners present hearing that will be inspired. Eventually, even if not right away, eventually they will feel inspired to enter the great vehicle and follow the bodhisattva path themselves. So that's another reason why it's good for Buddhas to praise bodhisattvas. It makes sense to do that. So those are 4 reasons why Buddhas praise bodhisattvas. And then he gives a quotation from a sutra called the Pile of Jewels Sutra. I think that Sanskrit is Ratnakutta Sutra. Kasyapa, it is like this. Just as, for example, homage is paid to a new moon and not to the full moon, in the same way, Kasyapa, those who have intense faith in me should bow down, there seems to be a word missing here, bow down to bodhisattvas, but not so to ones gone thus. Why? From bodhisattvas, ones gone thus arise. From ones gone thus, all hearers and solitary realizers arise. So, I don't know, maybe there are people who pay homage to the new moon, but not to the full moon. I know there's a lot of people who, have great festivals to the full moon, but maybe in some cultures, in some places, people prefer the new moon. But I think the idea is, as soon as we see, I always get excited when I see the new moon, the first sliver of the moon on the horizon. It's just almost invisible. But then you think, it's going to get bigger and bigger, and eventually it's going to be the full moon. So in the same way, Buddha is saying, people who have faith in me should bow down to bodhisattvas, should praise them and honor them. So then he goes on, this establishes through scripture that Buddhas are born from bodhisattvas. The former 2 reasons establish it through reasoning. Okay, so Chandrakirti is saying, Buddhas are born from bodhisattvas, but then he goes on to explain why. What's the reason for that? He uses reasoning, and then he also quotes from scripture. So this makes it quite solid, quite valid. Who can argue? I mean, there might be people who argue with this, but having given reasons and having given a quotation from scripture, this makes it very convincing. Okay, thus, it goes on, thus that here an expression of worship is not directly made to the 2 hearers and solitary realizers, or to Buddhas or bodhisattvas, who are renowned as objects of expression of worship in other books, is that he makes an expression of worship to the cause that is their root, compassion. So other books, other texts, start with an expression of praise to hearers and solitary realizers. And by the way, when that expression appears, hearers and solitary realizers, sometimes it seems to refer specifically to arhats, not just those who are on the path, but those who have reached the goal of arhat or foe destroyer. So they're definitely worthy of praise. And then in other books, they may express praise to Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, but Chandrakirti is doing something unusual, something unique, in that he is expressing homage to compassion. We haven't yet come to that, but anyway, eventually he's going to get to that. Compassion, great compassion specifically, because that is the root cause for all the others. It's the root cause of bodhisattvas, who are the cause of Buddhas, who are the cause of hearers and solitary realizers. So he's making the point that all of those wonderful beings, great beings, come from compassion. And that's why compassion is worthy of praise. And the indication by the first two lines of Chandrakirti's root text, beginning with hearers, so just a reminder here of what he said. Hearers and medium realizers of suchness are born from the monarchs of subduers. Buddhas are born from bodhisattvas. That these four, hearers and solitary realizers, Buddhas and bodhisattvas, are effect and cause respectively, is for the sake of identifying their final root cause, great compassion. So that's what I just said, Where do all these great beings come from? Compassion, great compassion. That gives rise to bodhisattvas, who give rise to Buddhas, who give rise to hearers and solitary realizers. In this way, though bodhisattvas are born from teachings by Buddhas, Chandrakirti does not need to explain this as he did for hearers and solitary realizers when he said that they are born from the monarchs of subduers, because he taught that those two are born from the monarchs of subduers in order to show that when the root of those two is also traced back, it meets back to compassion. And in the following stanzas, he indicates separately that the root of bodhisattvas derives from compassion. Okay. Ready to move on? Now we get to the causes of bodhisattvas. So where do bodhisattvas come from? So in the next chapter, chapter 2 in the book, Causes of Bodhisattvas, and the subheading indicating the three main causes of bodhisattvas. Question: if hearers and solitary realizers are born from monarchs of subduers, and if monarchs of subduers are born from bodhisattvas, what causes bodhisattvas? Response: Chandrakirti's root text says, the mind of compassion, non-dual awareness, and the mind of enlightenment are the causes of children of conquerors. The main causes of bodhisattvas are three: a compassionate mind, which will be explained in the following stanzas. 2, wisdom realizing the meaning of freedom from the two extremes with regard to things, non-things, and so forth. So that's another way of saying non-dual awareness. It's a kind of wisdom. And then 3rd is altruistic mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta. So those are the three causes of bodhisattvas. Chandrakirti says in his commentary that the altruistic mind of enlightenment is as shown in the quoted sutra. So the quoted sutra is this omnipresent doctrine sutra that says, one realizes the suchness of phenomena and generates the thought, I will cause sentient beings to understand this nature of phenomena. This mind that is generated is called an altruistic mind of enlightenment. He goes on to say, this does not indicate all the characteristics of an altruistic mind generation, because it takes cognizance of only one part, its objects of intent. So there's two objects we looked at previously, two objects of observed objects, they're sometimes called two observed objects of bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment. One is, do you remember? Sentient beings, and the other is enlightenment. You can just say enlightenment, yeah. So there's two objects, enlightenment and sentient beings. So enlightenment is the goal that you want to reach, and sentient beings are the reason why you want to help sentient beings. So it's said that bodhicitta has those two objects. So here when it says objects of intent, that refers to sentient beings. Your intention is helping sentient beings. So this verse from the sutra, this quotation from the sutra, only mentions that. It only mentions benefiting sentient beings, helping them understand the nature of phenomena, helping them understand suchness. Suchness is another term for emptiness. So when you realize emptiness, then you want all other sentient beings to realize that too, and you vow or commit yourself to bringing that about. So it doesn't mention enlightenment. It doesn't mention reaching enlightenment to be able to do that. The definition in Chandrakirti's commentary is also partial. So somewhere later, I don't know where, in the commentary, he says, one definitely generates an altruistic mind thinking, I will relieve all these worldly beings from suffering and will definitely join them to Buddhahood. So in this quotation, he does mention Buddhahood, but it's more like, I'm going to bring everybody else to Buddhahood. But it doesn't mention myself becoming Buddha. So that's what it says. The commentary does not mention taking cognizance of the object of attainment, one's own enlightenment. I mean, maybe that's implied. I'm sure it's implied. I'm sure Chandrakirti understands that, but it's not expressly, explicitly mentioned. However, Chandrakirti later shows in his commentary that an altruistic mind of enlightenment is generated in dependence on compassion. He says, one wishes to attain Buddhahood, which is the cause giving rise to the marvelous taste of ambrosia of the excellent doctrine, which is characterized by the disappearance of all wrong thoughts, and which has the nature of being the friend of all beings. Thus, he clearly mentions taking cognizance of the object of attainment, one's own enlightenment. Therefore, the complete definition of an altruistic mind generation is asserted to be the wish to attain highest enlightenment, and so forth, that is, for the sake of all sentient beings. So if you pull out pieces of his commentary in different places, you can put them all together and come up with a complete definition of bodhicitta. The mind of enlightenment. Mind of enlightenment. The wish to become enlightened of Buddha to help all living beings. That such appears in Jayananda's commentary is good. So Jayananda did something right. Sometimes he seems to get things wrong. Anyway, there is also no difference between what is said in Maitreya's ornament for the clear realizations and this system. So usually, I think you find the most information about bodhicitta, what it is, and so forth, in that text, Maitreya's ornament for the clear realizations. So that's where you have the full definition of bodhicitta with the two aspirations, the wish to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. So he's saying here that, so Chandrakirti's assertion about bodhicitta is in line with Maitreya's ornament for the clear realizations. So that's just some explanation about bodhicitta, the third of those three causes. Assigning these three practices as the causes of bodhisattvas is the system of Nagarjuna's precious garland. If you and the world wish to attain unparalleled enlightenment, its roots are the altruistic aspiration to enlightenment, firm like the monarch of mountains, compassion, reaching to all quarters, and wisdom, not relying on duality. So that's the source of these three qualities in Nagarjuna's text. This passage indicates that these three are the roots of enlightenment, but does not explicitly show that these are the roots of a bodhisattva. However, since root means beginning, Nagarjuna is indicating the three main causes of the beginning, and thus it can be known from the context that these are the three main causes of bodhisattvas. Chandrakirti's teaching that these three practices as the causes of bodhisattvas occurs at the time of analyzing the doubt. If hearers and solitary realizers are born from Buddhas and Buddhas are born from bodhisattvas, then from what are bodhisattvas born? Therefore, these three are not suitable to be causes for positing someone as a bodhisattva. They are the causes producing a bodhisattva. I wasn't quite sure what that meant, but I looked in the commentary by Geshe Jumpa Gyatso when he was teaching this text, and he said that this phrase, causes for positing, refers to definition. So you could insert definition in there. You could say these three are not suitable to be the definition of a bodhisattva, but rather they are the causes producing a bodhisattva. They are the things that give rise to or produce a bodhisattva, and not the definition of a bodhisattva. That's as much as I was able to find about that. But then there's an objection about this. So maybe we go through this. The objection and the response. That will make more sense. This objection is a little complicated, so we'll take it slowly. The objection is the lowest type of bodhisattva in relation to whom these three practices are assigned as causes novice bodhisattvas who have just entered the path or not. So in other words, when you're talking about the causes of bodhisattvas, you're talking about brand new bodhisattvas, novice bodhisattvas who have just, entered the path of accumulation. If they are, then it is incorrect to assign the altruistic mind generation of the great vehicle as a cause, because as soon as they attain such a mind generation, they are bodhisattvas. You see a problem there? What's the problem?
To have the result before you have the cause.
Not before, but simultaneous. I mean, normally, according to this school, Prasangika, and I think most other Buddhist schools, the cause has to precede the result. It has to be there first before the result arises. Just like this, first there's a seed and then the tomato plant. So it's like a really important point that cause and result are never simultaneous, and also, of course, never the opposite way around. You can't have the result before the cause. So the cause always has to precede the result. So what this person is saying is, bodhicitta, the altruistic mind of enlightenment, as soon as that arises in the mind, in the same moment, simultaneously, one becomes a bodhisattva. So how can you say that bodhicitta is the cause of a bodhisattva? Does that make sense? That's his objection. So that's the first objection. And then there's a second one. Moreover, it is not feasible to assign the wisdom that does not rely on the two extremes as a cause of bodhisattvas. This is because they initially generate a conventional mind of enlightenment and then train in the bodhisattva deeds, the 6 perfections. And thus, only when training in the perfection of wisdom do they train in the wisdom, not relying on two extremes. So he's saying that, how can you say wisdom is a cause of a bodhisattva? Because bodhisattvas only start developing wisdom later when they're practicing the 6 perfections. the sixth perfection, perfection of wisdom. Only then do they have wisdom. But this is what he's saying. But we'll see what Chandrakirti says about that. Okay, then he goes on. On the other hand, if the lowest type of bodhisattva in relation to whom these three are posited as causes is not taken to be a novice bodhisattva who has entered the path, then it would contradict the explanation of this lowest type of bodhisattva as like a new moon and is like the shoot of a medicinal tree. We're saying, if you're not talking about brand new bodhisattvas, novice bodhisattvas, as the results of these three causes, then it doesn't make sense to compare them to the new moon and the shoot of a medicinal tree. So there's a contradiction there between those analogies and these bodhisattvas who should be kind of later on the path. Does that make sense? So he's got a few objections in this paragraph. And then the response says, the second position is not asserted because it would incur the fault as explained. So I think what he means there is, the second position refers to this last sentence, where he says, are you talking about not novice bodhisattvas, but more developed bodhisattvas? So that's what he means by the second position. So he's saying, no, I'm not talking about that kind of bodhisattva. So yeah, it would incur the fault that you say. It would incur the fault that it doesn't make sense to compare them to a new moon and a shoot of a medicinal tree. Okay, so that one's been dispelled. That one's been knocked out. Therefore, the first position is asserted, meaning what I'm talking about here is brand new bodhisattvas, novice bodhisattvas. That's what I'm talking about. But it does not entail the faults stated above. Okay, so he goes on to explain. The mind generation that precedes a bodhisattva refers to the time of cultivating mind generation and not to an actual mind generation that has been produced through having cultivated it. The difference between these two mind generations is like that between tasting the bark and tasting the inside of sugarcane. Because the mere thought, I will attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings, is just verbal understanding, it is like tasting the bark of sugarcane. And although it is called an altruistic mind generation, it is not. Through having trained in this mind of enlightenment in accordance with quintessential instructions, special experience is generated that can redirect the mind well. This is like tasting sugar cane itself. Therefore, it is fully qualified as a mind generation. So what he's saying here is, when I say that, or Nagarjuna says that the altruistic mind of enlightenment is the cause of a bodhisattva, this is talking about, we usually call it contrived bodhicitta. Contrived bodhicitta. That means it's not actual or fully developed, fully qualified bodhicitta, but it's like you have to make effort to generate this wish to become enlightened for all sentient beings. So you have to do that for a long time. You have to work on cultivating that thought through the different methods, like the 7-point cause and effect method and so on. So you work for a long time to generate this thought, I want to become enlightened to help all sentient beings. It's still kind of forced or contrived, and it's compared to the bark of a sugarcane tree. What do they call it? Not sugarcane tree. What is it? Plant. Huh? Yeah. So if you're just chewing on the outside, you get a little bit of sweetness, but it's not like the inside. When you eat the inside, then it's wow, really sweet. So it's contrived bodhicitta. And then eventually that will transform into uncontrived bodhicitta, the real thing, actual mind generation. And as soon as that arises, that's when you become a bodhisattva. So he's saying that when he's saying that bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, is the cause of a bodhisattva, he's referring to the contrived form of bodhicitta, the one that does precede entering the path and becoming a bodhisattva. Does that make sense? So there's no fault, no contradiction. Thinking of this, Buddha said in the Questions of Adyashaya Sutra, verbalization is like the bark, contemplating the meaning is like the taste.
So he's saying that it's not spontaneous bodhicitta that's the cause of a bodhisattva, but training in it through training in the contrived, and that the contrived gives rise to the other.
Yeah, like most of us, I think, or all of us, I think all of us, we are trying to develop bodhicitta. We wake up in the morning and we generate, I want to help sentient beings, I don't want to harm them, I want to become a Buddha and help them, and so on. So like every day, and especially when we're actually doing the meditations, like on the methods, all sentient beings have been my mother, and they've been kind, and so on and so forth, generating love, compassion. So we're trying to develop this aspiration for enlightenment, bodhicitta, but it's still contrived. It's still not the real thing, because you've probably heard what happens when you get the real thing. It just arises spontaneously. You don't even have to try. As soon as you see a sentient being or hear of a sentient being suffering, just immediately, naturally, the bodhicitta rises. Similar to, like, if you're hungry, if you haven't eaten for a couple of hours, the thought of food just arises naturally. You don't have to make effort to generate it. You just want to, think of food and you want to go and get food. So they say in the same way, the thought of bodhicitta just arises naturally and spontaneously without any effort. So that's the point at which it becomes uncontrived and the person becomes a real bodhisattva. So we're just like trying to be bodhisattvas, trying to have bodhicitta, but it's still the contrived level.
So, with the wisdom realizing emptiness being the condition that is liberation, then training in it and developing the intellectual understanding of it is a cause. But
Sure.
Then you couldn't call the actual realization of it a cause because it exists at the time of the effect.
Well,
Is that
the next
same
part,
thing?
yeah, the next part of the text is talking about the wisdom. So let's go on to that and see if it's still unclear. Okay, a bear of the Bodhisattva lineage with sharp faculties. Okay, now he's talking about the wisdom. So now he's dealing with the second qualm or doubt of the objector, who thought that a bodhisattva only develops wisdom later when training in the six perfections. How can you say that the wisdom is cause of a bodhisattva? So he says, a bearer of the bodhisattva lineage with sharp faculties first seeks the view of suchness and then generates the altruistic mind. You've probably heard that from Venerable Children and His Holiness and so on. So they say, yeah, there's different ways of generating these two minds, wisdom and compassion or bodhicitta. So some bodhisattvas will generate compassion and bodhicitta first, and later develop wisdom. But some bodhisattvas generate the wisdom, understanding emptiness first, and then later generate bodhicitta. And they say sharp faculty. And one of my teachers said, sharp faculty doesn't have to do with intelligence. It sounds like that. It sounds like they're smarter. But he said it's not that. It's more like, I can't remember the words he used, but it's more like endurance, like strong determination and endurance, being able to really work hard and go a long way on the path. Not so much intelligence. Because they also say all bodhisattvas are very intelligent. Um, but anyway, there are some bodhisattvas who first generate wisdom of emptiness and then altruistic mind. Therefore, as will be explained later in the text, the second fault is also not incurred. And then he goes on to explain, non-dual understanding does not refer to the absence of the dualistic appearance of object and subject, which occurs later on the path of seeing. So that wouldn't make sense, because you can't have that kind of wisdom before you even enter the path. That only arises later. So in our usual language, we would say that the kind of wisdom that occurs before entering the path would be the inferential one, or the intellectual one, conceptual wisdom, understanding emptiness. So you have that first, and that arises based on reasoning, using reason, and then you generate an inference, an inferential understanding of emptiness based on the reason, and then you keep meditating on that, combined with serenity, calm abiding, and eventually you can achieve the direct realization of emptiness, where there's this absence of the dualistic appearance of object and subject. We say that it seems as if the subject, the mind, understanding emptiness, merges with the object emptiness, just like a glass of water poured into a pitcher of water. They become indistinguishable. So that's the real meaning of non-dual understanding. But prior to that, you have the inferential understanding of emptiness. So that's the one that is being talked about here, because that can occur before you enter the path, before you become a bodhisattva. So Chandrakirti's commentary explains it as wisdom free from the two extremes. Thus, it is not contradictory for it to occur prior to becoming a bodhisattva. Jayananda's explanation that non-dual understanding refers to an ultimate mind generation, which involves the non-appearance of subject and object and begins with the path of seeing, is quite senseless. I blew it again. Because non-dual understanding must also indicate wisdom that is a cause of a bodhisattva newly entering the path. Okay, so that dispels this person's doubts or objections, The bodhicitta that is the cause of a bodhisattva is the contrived form, not the uncontrived form. And the wisdom of non-duality, doesn't have to be the direct realization. In fact, it couldn't be the direct realization, but it would be the inferential, conceptual one. Well, I was just thinking, in the case of someone who attained the state of a foe destroyer, arhat, and then entered Mahayana path, they would have the direct realization of emptiness. But he did say earlier, a bearer of the bodhisattva lineage. So that, talking about someone who's got that inclination right from the beginning, natural bodhisattva. So I was thinking it doesn't completely dispel the doubts, because what about bodhisattvas who are not of sharp faculties and don't generate wisdom first, but generate bodhicitta first? Yeah, so that doubt seems to remain. But maybe to be a bodhisattva, you don't need all three causes. Maybe two is enough. I don't know. Any thoughts about that?
I remember Geshe pointedly saying this text was written for sharp faculty.
Yeah.
That was his way of getting around it.
Yeah, if they're not sharp faculty, they probably wouldn't even be reading this text.
The altruistic mind contains the aspiration to attain this wisdom. So even if one doesn't have it, there's the aspiration is there, and if it did not exist, you couldn't have that aspiration. So it's still involved as a cause.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about how, you know, prior to becoming a bodhisattva, you must have heard teachings on the bodhisattva path, and you must know that wisdom is an essential factor. You can't reach enlightenment with just one wing. You need the other wing. And so even if you haven't generated such a high level of wisdom, you still know that is something. You must have some understanding of wisdom. I don't know if there's a bodhisattva who could just generate bodhicitta on the basis of mere compassion and think, oh, sentient beings are suffering so much. I've got to do something about this. I've got to help them. Oh, there's Buddhahood. I'm going to reach Buddhahood to help them. And you haven't got a clue that wisdom is one of the essential ingredients. I don't know if that's possible. It may be possible. But I don't know.
It's like it's kind of covered by the, I don't want to say fact, but what I was always taught that you have to have renunciation to have bodhicitta. And in renunciation also includes knowing the possibility of being free from samsara. So that, in my mind, includes the wisdom. Because you couldn't really have renunciation fully unless you understood not just that there's a problem, but there's a solution. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah.
It'd have to have some awareness, like you're saying, Multarpa, because they'd have to have understood that there's a root of the cause of suffering and that can be antidoted.
Yeah, I'm just trying to remember reading volume 5. I'm proofreading volume 5 now of Venerable's books, and it's all about this topic of Four Immeasurables, compassion, love, bodhicitta, the bodhisattva's path, and so on. And there is mention of different ways that bodhicitta can arise. And I think this comes from some of the classic texts, or maybe even the sutras. And it does say that sometimes people just seeing a Buddha, just seeing a Buddha with marks and signs, and just feeling, wow, really inspired, and think, I want to do that. I want to become that. So it doesn't mention that they necessarily know all the causes for becoming a Buddha, what it means to become a Buddha. Yeah. But I don't know. So I'm just not sure if that is possible, that one could generate real, genuine bodhicitta without knowing all the different factors, all the different causes and conditions. I don't know. I'm not in a position to say. Okay, so the next part is getting into indicating that compassion is the root of even the other two causes of a bodhisattva. So of those three causes, compassion is the main one and is the root of the other two. Compassion is the root of the altruistic mind of enlightenment and non-dualistic wisdom. Therefore, it is the chief of the three causes. Indicating this in his root text, Chandrakiri says. So now we're moving on to verse number 2. Sympathy alone is seen as the seed of a conqueror's rich harvest, as water for development, and as ripening in a state of long enjoyment. Therefore, at the start, I praise compassion. So here it uses the word sympathy, and it is a different word in Tibetan, sewa. And I think Geshe Lundrup spoke about this and said it's actually the same. There's not really any difference, just another term for compassion. Usually in Tibetan, compassion is nyingje, karuna. So anyway, just think it's compassion. So this verse explains, so it explains how compassion or sympathy is important at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end of the Bodhisattva's path, the path to enlightenment. So he says, sympathy is important like a seed for the initial development of the marvelous harvest of a conqueror. Buddha. In the middle, sympathy is like water for increase, higher and higher. At the end, sympathy is like the ripening of a fruit and a state of long enjoyment for trainees. Because sympathy is asserted in this way, I, Chandrakirti, rather than praising hearers, solitary realizers, Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas, or the two other causes of Bodhisattvas, praise great compassion at the start of this treatise. It is not that Chandrakirti will praise compassion. The immediately preceding indication of its importance in the beginning, middle, and end with respect to growing the harvest of a conqueror is the praise. So he's doing it right at the beginning. Sympathy alone indicates that unlike the three different examples of importance, seed, water, and ripeness, in the beginning, middle, and end for an external harvest, only compassion is important in the beginning, middle, and end for the harvest of a conqueror. So he's using this analogy of harvest. We can say tomato plants, right? Because we have lots of tomato plants now. And I remember a couple of months ago, Venerable Yeshe was putting the seeds in the little pots over here, right? I think it was still snowy outside. And she was already planting the seeds. Yeah, so in the beginning, if you want tomato plants, you want tomatoes, you have to start with a seed. Okay, and then along the way, you need water. You put the seed in the pot, but you forget to water it. You're not going to get a plant growing. And then the end is when you've got the plant and the tomatoes are growing and they're ripe and ready to pick and put in your salad. So just as the seed and the harvest and the water, seed, the water, and the ripeness in the end, these are three essential stages of a harvest. Compassion. So Chandrakirti is saying compassion is like the seed, but it's also like the water, and it's also like the ripeness in the end. So it has this essential role in all three stages, beginning, middle, and end. You've probably come across this. I think it's in the Lam Rim as well, yeah? This analogy about the importance of compassion. Okay, so let's go on. The way that compassion's importance in the beginning is like the seed is this. Those who have great compassion due to being pained by others' suffering in order to protect all suffering sentient beings generate a mind that observes their object of object of intent, the welfare of others, with the thought, I will relieve all these sentient beings from the suffering of cyclic existence and definitely establish them in Buddhahood. Seeing that the ability to do this depends upon their own attainment of Buddhahood, they definitely generate a mind observing enlightenment with the thought, for their sake, I will definitely attain highest enlightenment. Because they understand that such a promise can't be fulfilled if the practices of giving and so forth, illustrated in Chandrakirti's commentary by non-dualistic wisdom, are forsaken, they definitely engage in these practices, the chief of which is wisdom. Therefore, the seed of all Buddha qualities is great compassion. Referring to this, Nagarjuna says in his precious garland, who with intelligence would deride the explanation in the great vehicle of deeds motivated by compassion and of stainless wisdom? So compassion is what, seeing the suffering of sentient beings and feeling strongly moved, wanting to relieve their suffering, and then what can I do? How can I do this? Realizing that I can become a Buddha, reach enlightenment to help all sentient beings. So it's compassion that really brings forth this aspiration to become a Buddha.
This may be too picky, so if it's irritating, let me know. But I get confused about this object of bodhicitta when he, like here again, he says it's the welfare of sentient beings. Mm-hmm. right? So we say in general, what's the object? Sentient beings. And you can say it's sentient beings with these three kinds that he goes on to explain, seeing them as impermanent, blah, blah, blah. But to me, having as the object the welfare of sentient beings is different. It's a different object.
Yeah, because somebody might have sentient beings as the object, and they have a mind of hatred. I hate all sentient beings. I want to kill them all. I want to make them suffer. So it's not just having sentient beings as the object, but it's sentient beings as the object with the wish to help them, to benefit them, to relieve them from suffering. So I think it makes sense. Is that what you're saying? That it's more, yeah.
Different ways, and there's a fine line.
Yeah. But I think that is mentioned in the ornament for clear realization. It says it's not just sentient beings, but the wish to help sentient beings, the aspiration to benefit them and relieve them from suffering. So that has to be part of it, and not just observing sentient beings. You could observe sentient beings with total indifference or with hatred or any other kind of state of mind. But observing sentient beings with compassion and love and wishing to benefit them, that's the important thing. Yeah. Okay, Nagarjuna says that all the meanings of the great vehicle are contained within the three. One, general practices induced by the altruistic mind of enlightenment. I think he's referring to the six perfections, giving and so forth. Preceded by two, compassion. So first comes compassion, and the particular practice of three, wisdom, free from the stains of conceiving the two extremes. So we can summarize all the meanings of Mahayana in those three. Okay. Next is the middle. The importance of compassion in the middle is similar to water. For although the seed of compassion initially grows into the shoot of an altruistic mind of enlightenment, if later it is not irrigated again and again with the water of compassion, one will not amass the two extensive collections that serve as the causes of the fruit, Buddhahood. In that case, one would actualize the nirvana of either a hearer or solitary realizer. So if you don't keep alive your compassion, you keep meditating on compassion and keeping that alive, you might end up, instead of going to Buddhahood, going to nirvana, your own freedom from suffering. However, if the shoot of an altruistic mind of enlightenment is irrigated again and again with the water of compassion, that will not happen, and one will actualize the enlightenment of a Buddha. So we need compassion continuously as we're following the path, not let it deteriorate or die. Okay, let's just do one more and then we can stop. The importance of compassion at the end is similar to a state of ripeness. For if one attains the state of a conqueror but lacks the ripened state of compassion, one will not be a source of enjoyment and use by sentient beings as long as cyclic existence lasts. It's kind of hard to imagine being a Buddha and not having compassion. It's like a rabbit, horns of a rabbit. But anyway, hypothetically, if you were a Buddha and then you didn't have compassion, then you might end up just sitting there and meditating and, sentient beings are too much trouble. I'm just going to meditate and not teach them and not help them. So obviously then that doesn't happen. But if it did happen, so it's just pointing out that compassion is also necessary at the end to continue helping sentient beings and getting them all out of samsara. Also, the collection of hearers, solitary realizers, and bodhisattva superiors would not increase in uninterrupted transmission in stages from one to the other. However, when great compassion operates continually at Buddhahood, the opposite occurs. So if a Buddha didn't have compassion, then we wouldn't be able to get these other beings, hearers, solitary realizers, and bodhisattvas, because they come from the Buddha's teachings, teaching the Dharma out of compassion, and then helping to guide beings in these different paths and be able to reach their respective goals. So that's why he's saying compassion is important, essential, not just important, but essential in the beginning, and then in the middle, meaning all along the way, and in the end, when you reach the final goal of Buddhahood, you need compassion. That's why he is praising compassion. Okay, so we'll stop there. Any questions before we finish?
Yeah. It just reminded me of a discussion we had when we were studying Pramanavartika last summer, where we have compassion being the cause for the Buddha to progress along. And there was a discussion about how can you prove that the Buddha had compassion, right? But just the way you just said it, the Buddhas didn't have compassion. They would not teach. They would just sit in bliss, right? So anyway, it's a useful thing to tag next time that conversation comes up.
Yeah, I'm following an online course in the Pramanavartika, and we're maybe not yet to that point, but the point where he's talking about how compassion can be cultivated in a limitless way. And there's some who say, yes, you can develop compassion, but not limitlessly. There's a limit to your compassion. So he's trying to prove it can be developed limitlessly, and you can even get to the point where you feel compassion for all sentient beings. And one point he said really struck me. This is Dharmakirti. He said, every sentient being has been our mother. Every sentient being has been our father. So at some point in time, we have already had compassion for every sentient being. I never heard that before. I never thought of that before, but it's true. Yeah, we felt love and we felt compassion for every single sentient being, at least once from beginningless time, maybe more than once. He says the problem is it gets destroyed by anger. Or maybe not destroyed totally, but damaged severely. And that's why, we haven't yet managed to generate this infinite compassion, this total compassion that a Buddha has. So we really have to get rid of our anger, and then we can generate this limitless compassion and love for every living being. But that's a really interesting point to think about. Okay, sometime in the past, I felt love and compassion for all these people that right now I have so much difficulty with. So if I can just get back in touch with that, get that back up in the surface of the mind rather than buried in the depths. So I found that interesting.
This really clarifies for me, maybe it's just a mental gymnastics, but the fact that spontaneous bodhicitta can be generated from that bodhisattvas can be born from contrived bodhicitta and inferential realization of emptiness with great compassion, puts my mind into a doable rather than, I didn't put them together. I thought direct realization, I thought spontaneous to be the cause of bodhisattvas. So it puts it, because right now, even though I'm fabricating at a really gross level, it is a contrived bodhicitta. So if I keep working on this over lifetimes, this is one of the causes to become a bodhisattva.
Substantial cause.
It reassures me that, in some way.
Yeah. Well, that's what the lamas are always trying to tell us, Just slowly, keep working, little by little, drop by drop, eventually you'll get there. Venerable Kunga.
So is the idea that in order to reach nirvana, like, a Buddha, he or she cannot just wish for his or her own liberation. In order to reach that state where knowledge of the path is possible, they have to have this altruistic intention. Is that what's being said here?
That state, you mean that state Buddhahood?
Of nirvana. of liberation.
Not nirvana. You don't, strictly
But-
speaking, you don't need great. You need a certain amount of compassion, I think, at least to stop harming others. But you don't need the compassion that says, I want to help all of them.
But like, I know they say there's no first Buddha, but, well, Shakyamuni, what drove him to realize, that nirvana and then teach it to others was bodhicitta. It wasn't wish for his own liberation. In other words, if there's no Buddhas around, can the wish just for your own liberation lead to Buddhahood?
So if you don't have a chance to meet a Buddha and know about Buddhahood and helping all living beings, and if you just wish your own freedom from suffering, could that eventually lead to Buddhahood?
Right.
Well, I mean, it does, according to our school, yeah, that there are those who first go to nirvana, and they go all the way to nirvana, but then eventually, realize that's not enough, and they enter the Mahayana. So you can go that way. And you could also change partway along. You might start off on the path to nirvana, and then hear about the Mahayana, and think, wow, that makes sense. I want to do that. So you could switch. So you can switch the different stages. But they do say there's this danger, if you do get into the bliss of nirvana, you can get stuck there for a long time. Hard to get pulled out. Because you're not aware of any suffering. You don't have any more suffering. You're not aware of sentient beings suffering. You're just totally 100%, absorbed in a state of non-suffering and bliss. And it's a little hard to come back out of that. That's what they say. I have no experience of that, but yeah. And even Pure Lands. I remember one Tibetan Lama saying that, there's a lot of people who pray to go to a Pure Land, like Amitabha's Pure Land. But he says, I'd rather come back to this world. Because in a Pure Land, there's no suffering there. It's so wonderful and pure. How would you develop compassion? Whereas here in this world, there's so much suffering. So it's really a good environment for generating compassion. That was his take on it. But I mean, I would think, Amitabha would make sure, they'd show movies, horror movies, to make sure that you don't forget about the suffering of the hells and this, you got to keep going until you reach Buddhahood. So I don't think you could get stuck there and just forget about sentient beings. And I don't know, fortitude, patience. Well, maybe they would manifest annoying sentient beings just to make sure that you have an opportunity to practice patience. Yeah, because when I was last there, they were asking lots of questions. People were asking me, well, which Pure Land should I go to? And, or how do I know what to aspire for my next? It's a little hard to answer that sometimes. I don't know, I can't tell you. You got to make up your own mind.